Pride of the Lion. Mashes had maneuvered the Sanguinium martyrs to a flanking position alongside the Empress flagship. With inquisitional armaments it might have stood a chance against one of the Asteroot's ships. It could do little against several dozen of them supported by the most powerful mobile fortress in the Imperial arsenal, so it would be best to take up a supporting position, or at least one where they could dart forward for a glorious sacrifice so the Empress might survive. "Open comms," he said to his communication officer. There was a pause before the connection broke through. "Empress, this is Inquisitor Mashes." "Inquisitor," the Empress said. "Have you alerted your Death Watch teams to the situation?" "They are focused on the last of the Greenskins, Empress," Mashes said. "None of the assigned Marines are Dark Angels or successors, so we do not have to worry about a potential mutiny if this gets out of hand." "Good, good. Keep close to us so that we do not lose communication, and I may like you to come aboard should this escalate further." Inquisitor Mashes, another communications officer, called. "We're receiving a communication from the Rock." Mashes paused. The Dark Angels would not single out a single Inquisition ship, so it was most likely a general broadcast. "That should go over well with the more trigger-happy members of our fleet." "Put it through," he said. "Let's see what the Dark Angels have to say." The communications officer nodded before keying in a response, static buzzing over the speakers before the communication began. "To the fleet orbiting Caesarea," a deep, commanding voice said. "I am the Lion, Primarch of the Dark Angels and loyal servants of the Imperium and the Emperor. Had we met on less dubious occasions I would congratulate you on your victory over the Greenskins, but I will refrain until the issue set before us is settled, that of your leader, the so-called Empress of Mankind. Nope, definitely won't go over well. My demands are simple: this Empress must come aboard the Rock, alone and unarmed, so that I may decide for myself if she really is the Emperor reborn. If she is who she claims she is, I will bend the knee and pledge the Dark Angels to your crusade. If she does not, we shall destroy your fleet and all who swear loyalty to the traitor. You have 24 hours to respond. Fail to respond by that time, and you will be fired upon." With that the message ceased. There was silence aboard the bridge of the Sanguinium martyrs, communications officers looking to Mashes for guidance. He said nothing before communication to the Empress flagship was resumed. "Inquisitor Mashes," the Empress said. "Empress. Bring your squad and cutter to my ship at once." Mashes had no chance to speak before the Empress terminated the call. Mashes' hand tightened, a vain attempt to release some of the tension left in his body. "The cutter is ready for transit and your squad has been alerted, Lord Mashes," another officer said. "Good." Mashes composed himself before turning. "Let them know I'll be right down. In the meantime, keep all power in our shields and do not activate macro batteries unless the Dark Angels fire." "Yes, Lord Mashes." Mashes continued on down the hall, hands still balled up. He had no time to grab his weapons or armor, and so would have to rely on other skills for now. Then, what skills can be used against a battle fleet commanded by a stubbornly loyal Primarch? Mashes spoke to no one until he stepped out into the hangar. The cutter had been prepared, Mugo Cyril's servitors loading the last of the machinery while his henchmen checked their weapons. Angelique was staring off into space, perhaps observing the Dark Angels through some psychic power, and said nothing until Mashes drew close. "The lion roars as the eye gathers below the petals of the flower," Angelique said. "The mare plucks the thorns away, so they may see themselves truly." "We heard about the fleet," Nikolai said as he plugged the power pack into his Hellgun. "Are we coordinating with the Empress?" "Yes and no," Mashes said. "Lion L. Johnson himself has delivered an ultimatum: the Empress speaks with him, or he blows the entire fleet to scrap metal. The bite of the lion is strong, the slash of the raven clean," Angelique said. "I had read stories of the Dark Angels Primarch being a bit blunt," Alexis said. "Pray hope that the Empress might be able to temper him." "I'm sure she will, but that is not for us to decide." Mashes brushed past his henchman and onto the cutter. "My guess is that the Empress will use this vessel to head to the Parley. Let's just hope the pilot interface is compatible with her powers, or it will be a short journey for all of us." "Well, we'll be here to steer her straight," Alexis said, smiling. His smile faded as the realization came over him. Unless, the Empress is going alone. As per the Dark Angel's commands, if she does decide to parley. Mashes sighed. Had I more foresight I would have arranged a little more contact with the Western Imperium, so we could better understand the Dark Angels in these hours. I guess we just have to rely on our own intuition. And hell guns, if things go to the warp quicker than we think. Alexis said. Mashes sighed, but at least the Valhallan was keeping his spirits up, somewhat. I do not think it will come to that, but we must be prepared for everything. Mashes replied. Come, we have tarried here long enough. Twilight and the sisters had hurried down to the hangar after they had finished with her armor, deftly dodging through crowds of crewmen and soldiers as they prepared for possible action against the Dark Angels. Moving in the armor was much easier than Twilight had thought it would be, especially once she had gotten her undersuit on, and she found herself darting through the halls at a pace that would have put her preconditioning self to shame. She might have given Applejack or Rainbow Dash a run for her money, but that could be considered wishful thinking. Their journey took several minutes of darting and diving through the halls before they finally came to the main hangar. Around Twilight, fighters and bombers were loaded up with weaponry in preparation for a possible attack, hundreds of missiles and bombs arrayed around her while servitors prepared their warheads. Celestia could not be seen, though she could make out the telltale silhouette of Masha's cutter as it rested near the entrance to the hangar. That's probably where Celestia will be. Come on girls, she called. We might make it to the Empress in time before things get further out of hand. The sisters nodded and followed after Twilight, armor rattling as they kept their pace. Most of the crewmen and servitors preparing the attack aircraft were swift to part for the Sororitas and Twilight, but a few suffering from brain locking needed a bit more encouragement before one of the sisters trampled it in their rush to find the Empress. Another minute of running, and Twilight spotted Celestia standing before the cutter. Corax and several custodes were on her left, the Primarch looking a bit more cross than usual, while Mashes and his group stood to Celestia's right, discussing something Twilight could not hear. Twilight slowed her pace before calling. Empress. Terra. Celestia looked back for a brief instant before turning her attention back to the cutter. I do not remember calling you down here. Some of the officers said this is where you'd be, so I came here to help. Twilight said, pausing to catch her breath before speaking. I haven't heard much else, though. Will the Dark Angels attack? Unlikely as of now, Corax said. The Lion was many things, but he was never one to engage an enemy without proper scouting beforehand, though I do not agree with the Empress giving in to his demands so easily. If it means that we are spared pointless bloodshed, so be it. Celestia replied. What demands? Twilight asked. The Dark Angels have requested an audience with the Empress aboard their fortress, Mashes explained. Unfortunately for us, that audience is the Empress alone and unarmed. Twilight held back a small gasp. That seems needlessly paranoid. That sentence is quite fitting concerning the Dark Angels, but that's not the point. Mashes turned to the Empress. With all due respect, Your Majesty, stepping onto the rock alone and defenseless is far too risky. If the Dark Angels are deployed for war, they could very well use it as an attempt to capture or assassinate you without further resistance. While I appreciate your concern, you are still approaching this as if I were a normal diplomat. Celestia shook her head. I have been absent for 15 millennia, but I still trust the Lion will not raise his blade against the fleet unless he is completely certain it is a battle worth fighting. Corax opened his mouth to speak, but Celestia shot him a short glare. That requires full confidence on both sides, Corax. Even with your ability to remain unseen, there is too much risk if you are discovered before I can talk the Dark Angels down, should you choose to accompany me. I must go alone. As you say, Empress. Corax muttered, turning away as Celestia looked to Mashes. Your cutter is ready for transit. Mashes gave a short nod of affirmation. Good. I shall return once I am finished. Terra. Yes, Empress. Twilight asked, rocking on her feet. Keep an eye on the fleet. Perhaps this is a time when a less warlike approach is needed. Twilight blinked a few times, her eyes darting between Celestia, Corax, and Mashes for any sign of relief. Sensing none, she merely gave a short nod. "I'll do my best," she said. "That is all we can ask for." Celestia replied. "You know your duties, see to it that they are carried out." With that, Celestia strode onto the cutter, the door closing behind her and leaving the others waiting outside. Corax was already moving off through the hangar, leaving behind Twilight, Mashes, his squad, and the sisters. "Orders, Terra?" Sister Naomi asked from behind her. "The Empress just asked me to keep an eye on the fleet, not command it," Twilight said, stepping to the side slightly so she could face both Mashes and his group and the sisters. "I doubt Corax will start a fight, but I should probably stick close to him in case he has any further concerns. Any more concerns than usual. No doubt a wise course of action. I will be here in the event that you need me." Mashes paused for a moment as he regarded Twilight. "New armor?" "Yes," Twilight looked down at herself. "The Empress wanted me to stay protected in the event I get into trouble like last time." "Fitting." Mashes nodded. "Should all go well with the Dark Angels, perhaps it will help to endear you to them once they are worked into the fleet." Celestia had shed her armor, adjusting the sleeve of her dress uniform as she waited for the cutter to dock aboard the Rock. The Dark Angels had respected the ceasefire, allowing her to travel under her own power for at least part of the last leg of her journey. How they would deal with her once she arrived, though, would remain to be seen. And there was always the concern that one commander of either fleet might get it into their head to do something rash. The cutter gave a small shake as it finally docked, Celestia rising to her feet as she walked towards the main entrance. She paused only to regard her armor, allowing a small part of her power to cloak it from view. That task complete, she continued on towards the door, taking a small breath before opening it to the outside. She was not even surprised to find almost an entire company's worth of Terminators waiting for her. "Is this what has become of the First Legion?" she asked, eyeing the massed ranks of white-clad Marines before her. "Have you grown so paranoid that one person requires most of your strength to subdue?" The Deathwing did not answer her, barely wavering in their resolve to stare her down. "At least that is commendable." Celestia said nothing more as a blue-clad Astaroth stepped forward, the librarian eyeing her up and down for a moment. "So you are the one who claims to be the Emperor Reborn," the Astaroth said. "Yes, I am she," Celestia replied. "I understand that tensions are high, so please escort me to the Lion so that I may prove my identity as the Master of Mankind." There was a pause, the Dark Angels looking to one another before Celestia spoke again. "Is something the matter?" "No matter," the librarian said. "Come, the Primarch is expecting you." Celestia nodded, stepping into the hangar as the Deathwing Marines formed up behind her. She remained silent, keeping her eyes ahead so as to avoid drawing further suspicion from the Dark Angels. The caverns of the Rock appeared unchanged, sweeping upward into darkness as Celestia and her escort moved further. It was far quieter than expected, with only the sound of boots against rock and ceramite echoing through the caverns. Celestia did not mind. If anything, it was a relief from the cacophony of religious hymns and machinery that filled her ships during the current crusade. In time, they would be silenced as well, but only when the Imperium was willing to accept her lack of divinity. As she mused on the thought, she felt something shift to her side. A void, almost, gliding through the ranks of the Terminators as it drew closer to her. She allowed only a side glance as a little figure dressed in green robes stepped from the shadows, the creature gliding up to her side as she walked. It made no noise, even its feet silent against the ground, and while the psychic void prevented her from truly seeing it for what it was, she could feel that the creature was watching her. It and several more of its fellows that glided past, some moving to join the first alongside Celestia. An odd escort, but then Celestia had learned to avoid dismissing such omens. "The Watchers draw close to you," the librarian said from ahead. "Do not consider it a sign of favor, for they often draw close to those who may yet present a threat." "Oh, you have no idea," Celestia thought, but she remained silent as the Watchers of the Dark continued to escort her. As they walked, Celestia could hear new sounds. Not that of machinery or Astaroths, but voices. Screams. Cries for mercy that would never be answered. The effect had, perhaps, been enhanced by her psychic powers, the walls themselves resonating the sound to her as she walked along. She would have peered further, but the effect grew stronger the further in they ventured, and the nulling void of the watchers was one that she did not intend to test. Interned on the throne, she had often searched for an answer to the Dark Angel's actions. Now, she had full proof of what happened within the darkened halls of the rock. All that remained, perhaps, was the lion. Celestia was eventually led to a grand door at the center of the fortress. The cries of torture had died down for now, Celestia recalling her power further to block them from her mind for a moment, aided by the small throng of watchers that surrounded her. The death wing parted, the librarian stepping forward to speak with several more Astaroths, one dressed in the armor of a chaplain while another stood with his own watcher, eyeing Celestia as she waited. The conversation continued before the three disappeared into the room, leaving Celestia alone with her watchers and Deathwing. The temptation to reach out and listen to the conversation held behind doors was great, but Celestia reined herself in again. She did not have to wait long before the Dark Angel leaders returned. "He will speak with you now. Do not leave him waiting." "You will not be joining us, then?" Celestia asked. The Dark Angels seemed more frustrated. The lion insisted that he pass judgment in private, the chaplain said. "Now go." Celestia nodded, stepping past the Dark Angels and into the room. The watchers followed after her, though only a few moved past the door and into the sanctuary. The door led to a large corridor, at the end of which stood a grand throne. It was stone, carved directly from the rock itself, inlaid with skulls and overseen by two great stone wings. Two watchers stood before it, staring out at the door, and the hall itself was supported by statues, each one carved in the visage of every Dark Angel Grand Master that had fallen since the heresy. And standing near the base of one of the last was the Primarch himself, Lionel Johnson. Unlike Korux, ravaged by time and woe, Johnson appeared much as he had when Celestia had first met him. He was dressed in black armor adorned with silver icons of Caliban and the Imperium, clashing slightly with his blonde hair. He had his back to Celestia, hiding his face from her as he continued to inspect the statue before him. Celestia remained in place, holding her hands in front of her and waiting for the Primarch to speak. Some of the knightly orders of Caliban were much more reverent in glorifying their fallen champions, he said, still not turning to face Celestia. Warriors set within their armor, embalmed yet standing as if ready to join battle against the monsters that haunted the forests. I never truly cared for the practice, but I did understand at least some of the motive behind it. Veneration of the dead is often for the living's comfort, is it not? Celestia replied. I suppose that justifies why these fools allowed the Emperor to rot for 10,000 years. Johnson muttered. And look where that led them, 15,000 years of superstition and betrayal, blindly worshipping a man who was more like them than they care to realize. Johnson turned his head to cast a sideways glance at Celestia. 15,000 years, and you arrive to indulge them even more. Do you think I parade around as a god and bask in their admiration? Celestia snapped, finally stepping towards the Primarch. I would just as well have them cast aside these superstitions and place their faith into something real, but even I cannot undo 15,000 years of belief with a wave of my hand. You seem quite hesitant to change anything, though. Johnson turned away and walked further down the hall. You claim the throne of mankind, yet your overtures and battles pale in comparison to what I have seen, what you should have seen were you truly who you say you are. You are like a child stepping into the shoes of their father, trying to appear as they are, and failing. Celestia furrowed her brow further. The legions are scattered, their primarches either missing or dead, she said. I wish to restore the Imperium to its true glory, but all I have are scraps, scraps that must be worked with if they are to prove useful. Johnson said nothing as Celestia continued. And what of you? Why do you stand here judging me now? If I was some ordinary liar and traitor, why am I standing before you and not a firing squad? That is why you are here, is it not? Johnson asked. You have won many over, even Korux. I wanted to see for myself what drew them to you, the Empress of mankind. Celestia remained silent, doing her best to meet Johnson's eye, no small feat as he kept dodging away from her. So, Empress, what will you say now to ensure that I will not kill you as a traitor and a liar? He asked. You were always direct in such matters, Johnson. Celestia replied. In truth, there is nothing that I can say that will fully convince you that I am the Emperor, just in the body of a woman. Your first mistake. Why come back as a woman? There is nothing to be gained from it besides the perverse fantasies of some of the less noble among your forces. At this, Celestia scoffed. If they really did surrender to such drives, they would already be slaves to the ruinous powers. She said. I can see already that this is a waste of time. If you are going to accuse me of treason, do so now and be done with it. You set yourself up to die instead of trying to defend yourself. Johnson asked. What else do I have? My fleet cannot reach me, I am unarmed and outnumbered, and I realize that arguing with you will only delay the matter. Celestia drew herself up straight. So go on then, call me a liar. Call me a traitor. Draw your sword and strike me if you so desire, I won't stop you. I only ask that you look me in the eye as you pass judgment upon me. There was a long pause, Johnson regarding her for any signs of weakness. Finally, he spoke. Judgment? You and I are not the only ones seeking it, are we? Celestia said nothing as a hidden door behind Johnson opened. 2 Deathwing Terminators and a chaplain entered, the former dragging an unarmored man between them. Johnson stepped aside as the man was tossed to the floor at his feet, the 2 Terminators backing off as the Primarch continued. My sons have kept many secrets since the destruction of Caliban. Johnson continued. If you are truly who you say you are, then you may be privy to at least some of them. Celestia turned her attention to the man before her. While he may have been a mighty warrior in some past life, he appeared now as an emaciated old man with barely enough strength to kneel. Under his breath he murmured a string of words Celestia could not decipher. As she regarded the man, she allowed some of her composure to soften. Sir Luther, she said, loud enough to catch the prisoner's attention and cause him to fall silent. He was your mentor, your closest friend, until you cast him from your sight and set him on the road to betray you. The demands of the Great Crusade were for excellence, Johnson replied. Luther failed on Saroche, and I could not allow such failure to go unpunished. He saved your life. Celestia countered. Only after toying with the idea of allowing myself and countless others to die for his own gain. Johnson's face grew stern. Had he been truly loyal, he would have quickly rejected those temptations and taken action to save those lost to the Saroshi, and the rebellion before it even began. And yet you rewarded his reaffirmation by banishing him from your sight. Celestia turned her full attention to Johnson. At his weakest, you betrayed him to his darkest desires and sowed the seeds of rebellion in his mind. Do not blame me for his betrayal, Johnson snapped. I was fighting the Imperium's wars, trying to serve and save the man you claim to be. And you could not even be bothered to see if your greatest friend was still the man you knew him as? Even a simple message would be enough to assure his loyalty, but you allowed your arrogance and your woundedness cloud your judgment. Johnson's composure fell away completely. You have no right to judge me for his actions. Yes, I do. Celestia's glare intensified. I asked much of you and your fellow Primarches during the crusade. I asked you to be my greatest warriors, the face of the Imperium against the tides of Xenos and traitors. How foolish I was, now that I see that my actions only encouraged doubt and mistrust among brothers and friends. She closed her eyes. But then, while my selfish desires may have fostered resentment, it was not my command that you banish Luther to Caliban, where his betrayal could grow more substantial. Silence. Johnson bellowed. You are twisting words against me. You are a traitor in the guise of a benevolent ruler, and you are not the emperor of mankind. If that is your judgment, Celestia said. Go on then, and make it so. Celestia closed her eyes, not watching as Johnson drew his sword and swung at her head. All she did was shift her energy ever slightly, even as the presence of the Watchers and other psychic wards strained against her. It was just enough to not only shatter the sword, but to send the lion staggering back several feet from both the shockwave and surprise. The Watchers barely flinched, and Celestia did not bother to extend her presence to the Terminators or their prisoner. She allowed the silence to linger for several moments before she opened her eyes, noting that while Johnson's composure remained, she could see small traces of surprise and even doubt among his eyes. "Look at me, Johnson," she said, stepping towards the Primarch. "Look into my eyes and tell me what you see? Are they the eyes of a liar, of a daemon wearing a pretty face to deceive the First Legion? Are they the eyes of a mere mortal, hoping to beguile themselves into your good graces? Or are they the same eyes you looked into when I first met you on Caliban? Are they the eyes of the ruler whose vision has rotted away over the course of 15,000 years?" Johnson said nothing, Celestia's vision narrowing. "Tell me, Johnson, are they the eyes of your emperor, or are they not?" Johnson remained silent, matching Celestia's glare with his own. The prisoner still muttered away, but both Primarch and Empress ignored him for now. Finally, Johnson spoke, though the tightness of his jaw indicated he was not fully convinced of what he was saying. "Yes. Yes, they are." "Good." Celestia allowed her gaze to soften. "I know that I still have much to do to convince you fully, but at least I have gained your trust, for now." Johnson said nothing. He was humoring her, perhaps, but it was a better step forward than nothing. "Now, to the matter of your prisoner. I have no need for him," Johnson said. "Do with him as you wish. Rather callous for your former mentor, do you think?" Celestia asked. Johnson did not reply, instead watching as Celestia crossed to the prisoner and knelt. The watchers followed her, though they did not close to her as they had when she had first arrived, still silently observing all Celestia did. "The darkness of chaos swells around those who see themselves loyal," Luther babbled, not even noticing as Celestia knelt before him. "Absolution comes for the guiltiest, it comes from she, the Emperor changed but in the flesh." "So it has." Celestia placed a hand on Luther's forehead. "Tsar Luther of Caliban, I find your sins laid bare. Now, I release you, be at peace." With a single pulse of psychic energy, Luther's head snapped back, the fallen marine's eyes growing pale as his body crumpled to the floor. There was a lengthy pause before Celestia rose. "It is done," she said. "Now, there is more work to do."